The winter morning in Boston was so cold that not a single bird sang. Snow fell lightly, blanketing the square in front of Fenway Park's Gate B, where the bronze statue of Carl Yastrzemski stood tall amid the misty fog. The first rays of sunlight hit the glove he held high, reflecting a dim, cold light like a memory. At 86, Carl walked slowly across the wet grass, his heavy coat unable to hide the frame that had grown frail after heart surgery. His breath was heavy but steady, each step measured by the faint beat of a heart once stitched together with steel. The wind from the stands blew past the green monster, creating a sound like the past whispering his name, recalling a lifetime of dedication. The booming hits of 1,967, the roars of thousands of fans, and the stifled sobs when Boston fell in Game 7. He paused before his own statue, his trembling hand touching the cold bronze, as if searching for the warmth of old days. No flashing cameras, no media, just an old man gazing at the youthful figure turned into history. This isn't a legend, a guide's voice seemed to echo from afar, but a heart that shattered and still kept beating to keep Boston alive. In his clouded eyes, the morning light reflected images of fiery summers when he batted 326, hit 44 home runs, and drove in 121 RBIs, numbers etched into Fenway's memory like a city's sacred hymn, a city once pained by defeat. But today, Yaz didn't look at the glory, he looked at the emptiness behind it, where every triumph left a scar, where the cheers of yesteryear now echoed only in the wind. At 86, the man who once carried Boston now only carried himself. He gently touched his chest, where a long surgical scar lay, feeling the slow, resilient beat. "I'm still here," he whispered, his voice fading in the cold. In the distance, the green monster, dusted with thin snow, stood silent and forgiving, like an old friend guarding a dream. Fenway was empty now, with only the wind weaving through wooden seats and the old man's footsteps mingling in the fog. No one saw him cry, but his dim eyes were wet. He knew time had taken nearly everything: strength, loved ones, the light of youth. Only one thing remained unchanged: his love for Boston. Behind the monument was a man who had buried his child and still thanked life for waking up. Fenway had no spectators this morning, but it had a silent witness watching him: time, the cold wind, and a city that never forgot the name Yastrzemski. On a train passing through Long Island's snowy fields, the 86-year-old man closed his eyes, picturing the boy he once was, a child of the land, of silence, of long days without laughter. Carl Yastrzemski was born in 1,939 inches, a small house amid a Southampton potato farm. His father, Carl Sr., a Polish man, worked until his hands cracked and hardened like tree bark. He loved his son by making him work, waking early, hauling sacks, plowing fields, pulling weeds. No hugs, no praise, just a cold nod when the boy did right. His mother, Hattie, was kind but quiet, her voice sometimes sounding like it came from a distant room. In that house, love was never spoken, only endured through duty. Yaz grew up between those two things, learning to stay silent instead of resisting, to swallow tears when scolded, to try again when he failed. Each afternoon, after farm work, the 12-year-old boy threw an old ball against a wooden wall behind the potato shed. The thwack of the ball bouncing back echoed in the empty space, the only thing answering him in a world that didn't listen. When tired, Yaz sat on the ground, looking at his calloused hands, thinking, maybe I was only born to throw into nothingness. But those dry thwacks forged the resilience that America later called the Iron Man of Fenway. From silence, he forged steel. On harsh winter days, he stood in the cold wind, throwing until his fingertips bled, just to forget the loneliness. He didn't dream of fame, only of the day his father would look at him and say, "You're good." That day never came. At school, Yaz wasn't a beloved student. Teachers called him stubborn. Classmates teased him for speaking little, only burying himself in sports. But the field was the one place he felt worth something. On the grass, he could shout, sweat, be free without judgment. Each swing was an answer to years swallowed by silence. By his teens, Yaz's talent stunned the small town. A farm boy who could hit a ball farther than grown men. Scouts started coming. Notre Dame offered a basketball scholarship. His father said little, but a rare pride glinted in his eyes. Then fate tested him again. His father fell ill, a heart condition that weakened the once iron man day by day. Medical bills, failed harvests, and family burdens weighed on Yaz. He looked at the gleaming scholarship letter, then at his father lying silent in bed. No one had to tell him what to do. The next day, he folded the scholarship, placed it on the table, and went to the fields. "It's okay, Dad. I'll work." His voice shook, but his father's calloused hand gripped his, saying nothing. As the illness worsened, Yaz quit school, seeking another way to save the family. A family friend introduced him to an amateur baseball team. He hit, ran, threw with all that remained of his youth. Then, in 1958, when the Red Sox scouted new talent, the name Yastrzemski made the list. They offered a tryout contract. That night, the 9-year-old stayed awake. On the table were an old canvas bag, 2 cracked leather balls, and a cheap train ticket to Boston. His mother stood silently at the door, not crying, only saying, "Go. Don't fear the cold." His father lay in bed, watching his son leave without a word. Yaz bowed, packing his childhood into the bag. As the train moved, he looked back at the foggy potato fields, the bare trees like waving arms. His breath was icy, but a strange fire burned inside a fire of a boy who lived in silence, now determined to speak to the world through the crack of bat and ball. No one knew the journey would lead to heights and depths, but at that moment, in the dim light of a Long Island dawn, Carl Yastrzemski was just a young man carrying the loneliness of childhood and a fragile hope that, somewhere ahead, a field waited to call his name. Boston, spring 1961. The city was still shadowed by the era of Ted Williams, the immortal Red Sox saint, called the Kid, the Splendid Splinter, the god of Fenway. He had just hung up his glove, leaving a void too vast for anyone to dare step into. But then a 1-year-old from Long Island was called up. His name was too long, hard to read, impossible to pronounce. Yastrzemski? The Boston Globe ran a mocking headline, "Who dares replace God?" And the answer was, Carl Yastrzemski, lanky, quiet, carrying a fear of being forgotten. On his first day at Fenway, the stands were packed, but no one came to cheer for him. They came to see if the rookie could touch the spot the legend left empty. Every missed swing, every errant throw drew boos. He wasn't just playing ball, he was fighting a city's memory. His first season ended with a 266 average. Enough to survive, not enough to be loved. Anonymous hate letters arrived. "Get out of Boston. You're not Ted." Many nights he didn't sleep, sitting alone in the locker room, hands bloodied from thousands of catches under the green monster. In silence, Yaz stared at the 37-foot wall, its deep green paint scarred with history's scratches. It was an enemy that sent balls bouncing astray, but also a teacher of patience. By day, he was compared. By night, he practiced in the dark. Fenway's lights were off, only the ball's thud against the wall echoing in steady beats. Once, blood dripped from his hand to the ground. Yaz looked down, giving a weary smile. "If the world won't let me fly," he whispered, "I'll climb." He learned every brick of the wall, memorized every angle of a ball's bounce, every difference between dry and damp days. The green monster became his mountain where he punished and saved himself. No one knew, but each night Yaz stayed, until Boston's streetlights dimmed, sweat mixing with blood soaking the cold ground. They called him cold, but it was the only way to survive. He couldn't let himself be weak, couldn't let tears fall before the crowd. In his heart, "You're not Ted," repeated like a curse. Yet that curse forged his iron will. Every ball he chased off the wall wasn't just practice, it was a battle against fate. Slowly, Boston's fans noticed Yaz wasn't an imitator. He was a different kind of warrior. Not proud, not dazzling, but enduring and true. He lacked Ted Williams' smiling eyes, but had shoulders to bear any expectation. After each game, he was the last to leave the locker room. The dim yellow light fell on a young face already lined with weary creases. Yaz removed his glove, hands trembling, middle finger torn, bruises running long. He taped them silently. No nurse, no reporters, no one cared. Only Fenway saw. And Fenway understood. Perhaps that's why, later, that green wall never betrayed him. It kept the finest rebounds of his career, like a gift for the one who endured it longest. Years later, he said, "I didn't beat anyone. I just survived." Indeed, to live in a legend's shadow, Yaz had to die many times in loneliness, in hurt, in fear of failure. But from that wreckage, something else arose, absolute resolve. When teammates left the field, when lights went out, he stayed, catching, throwing, in silence. No one saw his tears, only his steely gaze holding a youth burning out. And on a quiet night in 1962, under the damp green wall, Yaz looked at Boston's sky and told himself, "Someday, this place will know my name." 1967. 6 years after a quiet young man was booed at Fenway, Boston found its breath again through that same man. The city was exhausted. War, injustice, and the haunting belief that the Red Sox died with Ted Williams. But that spring, people began whispering a phrase no one dared believe. Asterisk, the impossible dream. Asterisk, Yaz, now 27, was no longer the awkward boy of old. He was a man hardened by failure, quiet from discipline, and tough as steel from pain. All summer long in 1967, he hit like he was settling a debt with the past. Each swing was a challenge to fate. The whole city watched every worker, driver, teacher, student, everyone talked about Yaz. He was the hope of a city that had forgotten how to dream. Every game at Fenway was like a ceremony. The stands rose when Yaz stepped to the plate, kids holding signs reading, "Do it, Yaz," like a prayer. September rains soaked red wool sweaters, but no one left their seats. They knew they were living a miracle. By season's end, the Red Sox had 2 games left, both must-wins. Yaz, eyes dark with exhaustion, still took the field with a faint smile. Game 1, he went 3 for 4, pushing Boston ahead. Game 2, he went 4 for 4, one of the greatest hitting streaks in baseball history. In total, 7 for 8 over 2 days, carrying the team through the jaws of death. When his final hit rolled past the opponent's glove, Fenway erupted. Poor and noble, white and immigrant, all hugged and cried. A city that had forgotten hope came alive because of a man named Yastrzemski. He finished the season with a .326 average, 44 home runs, 121 RBIs, winning the Triple Crown, a feat untouched for over a decade. The press called him the Messiah of Boston, the redeeming hero. But Yaz said little. He just bowed his head, wiped his sweat, and prepared for the World Series. On the other side were the St. Louis Cardinals, led by the monstrous pitcher Bob Gibson. When the series began, Boston was in a fever. Bars overflowed, every radio and TV tuned to Fenway. Yaz kept fighting. Each hit a knife through the air. Boston won Game 6, forcing a Game 7. The city went wild. They believed fate had turned. That morning, light rain fell on Fenway's roof. Yaz sat alone in the locker room, leather gloves on his lap, hands trembling slightly. He didn't pray, just stared into the mirror face speckled with sweat, eyes tormented by a man who knew fate rarely forgave twice. The game began. Fenway was packed, 35,000 silent. Bob Gibson pitched like he carried the world's wrath. Balls shot like lightning, curving in the wind, tearing through space. The Red Sox were suffocated. Gibson destroyed them one by one, and even Yaz, who never feared anyone, could only grit his teeth. He still hit, but each ball landed in an opponent's glove. When the Cardinals led 7-2, rain began to fall. Fenway turned gray. In the final inning, Yaz stepped to the plate. The crowd fell silent. No one believed the Red Sox could recover, but they wanted to see him one last time. Under the rain, he crouched, gripping the bat. Across from him was Bob Gibson, face cold as iron. The pitch came a perfect throw. Yaz swung. The sound was crisp, sharp, echoing. The ball soared, grazed the wind, then fell into an opponent's glove. The game ended. Boston lost. Gibson raised his head in pride, while Yaz stood still, his wet cap sagging. Cameras caught him looking up at the stands, eyes tearless but shimmering, ready to break. They called it the most beautiful defeated gaze of the century. As he walked slowly off the field, Fenway's crowd stood, clapping. No one blamed, no one left. They knew they'd seen something rare, a man who gave everything he had. He gave everything he had, and Boston gave him its tears. That night, he didn't go home. He stayed at the park, sitting in the dugout, watching the rain stretch on. Somewhere in the city, men hugged their kids and cried. Mothers hung Red Sox flags by windows. Boston had no trophy, but it had something greater pride. And Yaz, leaving Fenway in the dark, heard only his footsteps on the wet ground, heavy as guilt. He didn't know that from that day, the nation would remember his name, not for winning, but for how he lost with honor, in tears, and in the light of resolve. Fenway Park was silent the next morning. Wet wooden seats glistened, the green walls streaked with water like an unhealed wound. In the field's center, a faint shoe print marked the grass. Yaz was gone, but his warmth lingered, like a promise that Boston would live again, even if it took another generation. 1,967 ended in tears, but Boston never forgot. They built a monument to Yaz in their hearts, and for years, his name meant faith. Yet faith can become a chain. Each passing season, as the Red Sox stumbled short of paradise, the city looked back to him. Yaz became a symbol, but also the heaviest shadow Boston ever placed on one man. Through the 1,970 seconds, he kept playing, kept carrying, though his legs tired and eyes darkened from sleeplessness. In his 30s, while others thought of rest, he was still first to the field, last to leave. No one understands the weight of glory, he once said, until they have to live with it. In the fall of 1975, the Red Sox reached the World Series again, facing the Cincinnati Reds. Game 6. Carlton Fisk's historic home run set Fenway ablaze, Boston touching the impossible. But fate, as always, played its cruel old trick. The next day, Game 7 Yaz hit the final ball, but it fell into an opponent's glove. Once more, Boston fell just short of glory. He stood on the field, watching teammates leave with bowed heads, sweat mixing with rain. In the stands, thousands clapped, but the sound felt more like a farewell than a celebration. In 1978, tragedy struck harder. The Red Sox faced the Yankees in a playoff game for a postseason spot. The city held its breath. Yaz, now 39, his worn shoulders still bearing hope. The game dragged on until Bucky Dent, a name Boston would never forget, hit a home run that silenced Fenway. The Red Sox trailed 5-4. In the final inning, Yaz was the last chance to save them. He stepped to the plate amid chants of, "Yaz, Yaz!" Facing him was Goose Gossage, the Yankees' famed pitcher, who said one slip could end it. The ball shot like a bullet. Yaz swung. It soared high, curved, then dropped softly into the shortstop's glove. Fenway went quiet. A pop-out ended the season. The dream, an era. The image of him bowing his head, clutching his glove, standing alone on the field became one of baseball's most tragic icons. The loneliest king of Fenway, they called him. A king without a throne, without victory, only absolute loyalty and indescribable solitude. The locker room was empty after. Dim yellow light fell on scattered gloves, nameplates strewn about. Yaz sat alone, holding his glove like an old friend. Sweat dried, but his heart held only emptiness. The next day's papers still called him Boston's icon, the man who never gave up. But as the Globe printed praise, he sat alone in his small apartment, staring out the window, an open bottle on the table. Outside, Boston buzzed, but in that room, time froze. He didn't drink to forget, but to quiet. Only when whiskey hit his blood did he feel free from the pressure of being a hero. In the years that followed, his body began to betray him. Chronic back pain, swollen knees, hands numb each morning. Yet he rose early, trained before teammates. Not to prove anything, but because he feared stopping would make him disappear. Fenway became the only place he felt alive. Each time he bent to pick up a ball, his back creaked, but he refused to rest. His body faltered, but his spirit never yielded. His family cracked in silence. Years of playing away, endless trips, sleepless nights, and suppressed anger distanced him from those he loved. Carol, his wife, who once waited through long seasons, was now a shadow passing through quiet rooms. Yaz drank more. Most nights, he sat alone in the living room, TV light flickering on a face aged too soon. When whiskey hit his throat, he thought of the green wall, the only friend that never left. Fenway still filled with fans, still echoed with Yaz, but behind the cheers was a weariness no one saw. Each season's end left him emptier. Fame was no reward. It was armor crushing his heart. Every backache was proof of the price of resolve, loyalty, refusal to let go. By the 1,980 seconds, Yaz neared 40. Peers retired, but he clung on. Not for money, not for fame, only because he feared he'd be nothing without baseball. One fall evening, after another loss, he stayed when all had gone. Fenway was empty, lights casting on vacant stands. Yaz sat in the dugout, rubbing his glove, staring at the dark green wall. He spoke softly, almost a whisper. I gave everything. But maybe it wasn't enough. Then he stood, walked a slow lap around the wet grass. Each step was an unspoken goodbye. Somewhere, Fenway's spirit watched, thanking him for teaching Boston to endure. For in every defeat, every cold winter, there was a gaunt, solitary, unyielding man who turned loneliness into honor, the lonely king of Fenway. As Fenway's lights dimmed, Carl Yastrzemski's life slowed, quietly slipping into memory. He retired in 1983, leaving the field to prolonged cheers, like a requiem. But after the noise came a void no one could fill. In his early retirement, Yaz tried normal life, waking early, reading papers, fishing, teaching local kids to swing. He thought he'd done the hardest thing, letting go of the spotlight. But fate, as always, didn't let go. In 2004, a grim March morning, the phone rang in his quiet Massachusetts home. On the other end, devastating news. His son, Carl Mike Yastrzemski Jr., was hospitalized with a blood clot after hip surgery. Yaz rushed to Beth Israel, heart pounding like it might burst, but he arrived too late. The doctor shook his head, explanations lost in a choked hum. He looked at his only son lying still on the hospital bed, face still holding the gentle smile of childhood. The father's body went limp. He sank beside the bed, clutching his son's cooling hand, words failing. He'd lost to Bob Gibson, to fate, but never this painfully. At the funeral, Yaz barred the press. No media, no crowds, just a gray morning at a small seaside cemetery. He stood alone by the white flower-draped coffin, eyes sunken like burned-out coals. As the priest spoke, Yaz didn't cry. He bowed his head, whispering, I won batting titles, but I lost the only game that mattered. Family turned away, none daring to touch that pain. After the burial, he returned home, locking the door for weeks. His son's old glove and ball sat on the table, gathering dust. Fenway was distant, past cheers now just whined hissing through windows. In 2008, as emotional wounds still bled, his physical heart betrayed him. A searing chest pain landed him in the hospital, and doctors declared a triple bypass the only option. On the operating table, staring at the cold ceiling, he felt a vague fear, not of death, but of leaving without telling his son how much he missed him. The surgery lasted over 6 hours. When he woke, the white hospital ceiling blurred, the heart monitor beeping steadily. He mouthed faintly, "Mike, I'm still here." Tears rolled down his temples, mingling with cold sweat. The heart stitched, but never healed. They mended his heart, but the deepest wound remained untouchable. After that, Yaz rarely appeared publicly. He shunned spotlights, noise, ceremonies recalling the past. "I lived my life in applause," he once told an old friend quietly. "Now I just want to hear silence." Each morning he went to the garden, tossing balls to his young grandson, eyes distant, as if throwing into an invisible void. Sometimes, neighbors saw him sitting long on the porch, watching the sun set through trees, hand on his chest where the surgical scar lay. "He lives like he's listening to his heart ask if it can still love," one said. The Red Sox occasionally invited him to Fenway for ceremonies, but he mostly declined. "I'm not sure I'm strong enough to go back there," he explained. "Every brick knows my son's name." Once, when the team won in 2004, the year his son died, someone asked if he was happy. He gave a sad smile. "Boston deserved it, but I wasn't there to celebrate." As crowds flooded streets cheering, he sat before the TV, sound off, watching through a dim screen. In his heart, victory and loss blended like inseparable colors. At night, Yaz's small home glowed with faint yellow light. He sat by his son's framed photo, holding an old ball. "If I could," he whispered, "I'd hit 1,000 more, just for one call from you." Outside, Boston's wind swept through trees, carrying Fenway's distant echo. His heart beat slowly, each pulse a reminder he still owed life something. But he knew a part of him lay buried with his son. And from that day, Carl Yastrzemski was no longer the legend on the field, just a father, with a stitched heart that never healed. 15 years after losing his son, Fenway Park echoed with the name Yaz again. But this time, it wasn't the legend of the past stepping onto the field, it was his grandson, Mike Yastrzemski, a young player for the San Francisco Giants. In September 2019, Boston welcomed the Giants for an interleague game, and the city buzzed as if time had turned back. That morning, Carl Yastrzemski, then 80, donned a thick coat, his trembling hand holding a ball prepared for the ceremonial first pitch. The autumn wind swept through the park, carrying the familiar scent of grass, a scent he'd held in his heart for over half a century. He walked slowly from the dugout to the field, each step passing through memories, old home runs, defeats, departed teammates, and the image of his son, Mike Jr., standing there, smiling gently as he once did. The stands began to chant, "Yaz, Yaz, Yaz." The sound struck his heart like an echo of 2 generations. People saw him raise his hand in greeting, eyes glistening, trying to hold back the surge of emotion. As he reached the pitching spot, his grandson Mike stood at catcher, glove raised, waiting. 2 Yastrzemskis, 2 different uniforms, sharing a moment history rarely grants. Fenway Park fell silent, then erupted in applause. He threw a slow, gentle, but precise pitch. When the ball landed neatly in his grandson's glove, the crowd exploded not just for the ceremony, but for its deeper meaning. Asterisk. He didn't just throw a pitch, he passed a soul. Asterisk. Mike ran up, embracing his grandfather. The cameras caught the moment, aged eyes blurred with tears, trembling hands resting on his grandson's shoulder, and a gentle smile mixed with deep pain. In that instant, he saw his son's shadow in his grandson. The same eyes, the same stance, the same passion. 3 generations of Yastrzemskis, past, present, future, met in a single pitch. Boston's fans said nothing. Many stood still, tears streaming, knowing Fenway that day wasn't just a ballpark. It was a cathedral of memory, where a father who lost his son, a grandfather, found family's warmth again in his grandson's embrace. After the game, Yaz didn't stay for the celebration. He left the park early in the night. Boston's lights glowed. Fenway bathed in warm gold, but he knew he needed silence. At home, he turned on the TV, rewatching the ceremony. Each time his grandson appeared on screen, he touched the old ball, the one he threw in 2019, and whispered softly, "Mike, do you see? Your boy did it." At 80, his eyes were dim, but in the screen's faint light, another glow shone, the light of legacy. He sat late into the night, the living room lit only by the TV's blue glow reflecting on his aged face. Deep wrinkles around his eyes mapped time's passage. Fenway in his memory still blazed, the chant of Yaz echoing somewhere in his heart. He knew he'd passed on not just a legacy, but a piece of his soul. And perhaps, for the first time in years, he felt lighter. That night, before turning off the TV, he whispered in a frail breath, "Thank you, Boston. Thank you, Mike." Then he gently placed the ball on the table, like setting down a sacred relic that had fulfilled its purpose. In the quiet darkness, the sound of rain on the porch blended with his slow breathing, soft as a prayer. Fenway slept, but the echo of Yaz lingered in the wind, not the crowd's call anymore, but time's answer to a man who lost everything to keep one thing alive, a love that never fades. 2025. Spring in New England arrived late, the wind still cold, old snow lingering on the porch. In a small wooden house on the North Shore, Carl Yastrzemski stepped into the garden at dawn. At 86, his eyes were cloudy, vision so poor he squinted to see clearly, and his heart stitched together with steel beat slowly, wearily, but as steadfast as his life. Each morning, Yaz carried a glove and ball, stepping onto the misty backyard, throwing alone. No crowd, no cheers, just the crisp sound of the ball hitting the glove, echoing in the stillness. It was the final ritual of a lifetime, a greeting to the past. Each throw recalled Fenway, the towering green wall where he learned to climb instead of fly, where he left his blood, tears, and soul. In his mind, the green monster stood tall, its shadow stretching across the grass like an old friend quietly watching. Yaz smiled faintly, looking up at the foggy sky, whispering, "We fought well, old friend." It wasn't just a farewell to the ballpark, but to all he loved, his lost son, departed teammates, and a Boston he once woke with a swing of faith. On the living room table, a photo from his 2013 statue unveiling at Fenway remained. The afternoon sunlight in the picture glinted on the bronze face, casting a small glow on the raised bat, a glow matching a faint crack in the statue. A thin line someone said looked like a heart. He loved that detail. "Why be perfect?" he once said. "True beauty lies in the cracks that still stand strong." Fenway symbolized youth. That crack symbolized time, the only enemy even Yaz couldn't defeat. Today, the Red Sox still invite him to honor ceremonies, but Yaz usually sends thanks. He knows his time has passed, and he's at peace with it. He lives simply, quietly, walking slowly around the house each day, doing breathing exercises to keep his weak heart going. Sometimes his grandson Mike visits, bringing a new jersey, sharing team stories. The two sit on the porch, watching the sunset, saying little silent, letting New England's wind carry old memories. At night, Yaz sits by the window, moonlight falling on a black and white photo of his youth, a man before the green monster, eyes bright, shoulders square, face carved like steel. He smiles faintly. The young man in the photo seems to look ahead, believing more games could be won. Now, he knows no victory lasts forever, only endurance lets a person live fully. His heart was mended by surgery, they said, but broken by time. Yet it kept beating for Boston, for a son, for a dream. Outside, mist falls lightly on the porch. The balls thud against the gloves steady. Yaz throws slower, but each pitch is still precise trembling hands carrying the memory of thousands of past swings. As the sun rises, he sets the ball on the grass, gazing at the empty space where he imagines the green monster still stands. The wind blows, cold but gentle, like an answer. Fenway Park, miles away, still lights up each game night. But for Boston, somewhere in the cries of "play ball," echoes the man who bound his soul to this city. Not for wins, not for fame, but because he taught them a glory that comes only through endurance. If you've ever lost, fallen, felt too weak to go on, remember this man who rose after every defeat, threw one last ball when his heart barely had strength for a dream. And share this story of those who taught you to stand after pain, to love despite a shattered life. For sometimes, humanity's greatest legacy isn't in victories, but in never stopping trying. In the story of Carl Yastrzemski, what pains us most isn't the losses on the scoreboard, but the human cost of keeping a city believing in tomorrow. From the blazing 1967 Triple Crown to the rain-soaked Game 7 under Bob Gibson's hand. From the hope, lit Game 6 inches 1975, to the final pop-out in 1978, cutting dreams apart. From the whispered words in the 2004 Beth Israel funeral, "I won batting titles, but I lost the only game that mattered," to the 2008 heart surgery, when the heart was stitched but never healed, to the 2019 first pitch to grandson Mike at Fenway, where he didn't just throw a pitch, he passed a soul, a covenant across generations. These moments show Yaz's tragedy wasn't the lack of a championship ring, but the solitude of duty. Nights practicing under the green monster, hands bleeding, fear of spotlights in old age, and the morning ritual of throwing alone like a prayer for Boston's memory. Yet he rose with dignity. Seeing the 2013 bronze statue, its crack kissed by light, he embraced imperfection as beauty. In his final monologue, "We fought well, old friend." He spoke for a community. We fought honorably. For Americans today, the lesson is clear. Honor steadfast work over fleeting glory. Lose with dignity to win with character another day. Cherish family and memory as Yaz cherished his son through his grandson. And when life stitches you with scars, work, illness, loss, let your heart keep beating for community, children, a shared dream, as his did, a heart mended by surgery, worn by time, yet beating for Boston, for a son, for a dream. If Carl Yastrzemski's story stirs you with the power of endurance and undying love, please subscribe to join us in celebrating America's great hearts. Thank you for joining us. See you in the next video where we'll continue telling stories of people, faith, and legacies that transcend time.